Hello everypony, Dark Shadow here again with yet another glorious fanfiction reading. The story I have for today is one that I have been following on fanfiction.net for quite some time now. It was really enjoyable when I read it, and I think that you guys are going to find it to be really enjoyable as well. The story I have for today is called Love's a Drag-On by Thunder Magus. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1. The afternoon sun shone brightly upon the meadows on the outskirts of Ponyville, where a little purple dragon busied himself picking dragon peppers, whistling to himself while he worked. Dragon peppers were rare vegetables that grew miles outside of Ponyville. Dragon peppers were named such based on the myth that they were spicy enough to cause a pony to breathe fire. Spike had been proven on one occasion that this myth was true when Pinkie Pie had thrown a party for a griffin named Gilda, who ate a cookie with these peppers thrown in them. Collecting the peppers was an assignment from Twilight Sparkle, who wanted to study these peppers and find out what gave them their unbearable heat. Of course, acquiring dragon peppers also presented Spike with the opportunity for some very hilarious pranks. He would have loved to see what would happen if he could sneak just one of them into Rainbow Dash's food, or slip one into Pinkie Pie's cake mix. Rarity, of course, was off limits. Simply thinking about that gorgeous white unicorn put a smile on Spike's face, and rapture in his heart. There wasn't a more beautiful pony in Ponyville. No, in all of Equestria. Spike shook his head to clear his thoughts and get back to his duties. It was lonely out there in the flat, grassy countryside. Lonely and quiet. He was just a baby dragon after all. Like most infant creatures, he craved company and hated being alone, especially in a place he wasn't familiar with. This task demanded his full concentration. If he could just find one more bush of peppers, he'd have enough for both Twilight and for some well-meaning pranks. The dragon's yellow cat-like eyes locked onto a pepper bush just ahead, with plenty of ripe red pods ready for picking. They were warm to the touch, so much that it was a miracle he didn't have blisters on his hands from all of the other ones he'd been picking since morning. He hurriedly plucked them off one by the stems, anxious to get back to Ponyville and be with his friends again, especially Rarity. Sweet, beautiful Rarity, with those big dark blue eyes that shimmered like fine diamonds. Sweet, delicious diamonds. Distracted as he was in his thoughts, Spike yelped in surprise as something slightly warm and damp pinched his arrow-tipped tail. Ow! Spike snapped around, but there was no pony there. After a shrug, he went back to his picking, unaware of another creature's presence on the other side of the bush. Spike's distraction in picking the peppers left the creature with another opportunity to nib at his tail. He wheeled around, faster this time. The leaves of the bush danced, leaving Spike wondering if whoever was messing with him brushed against the leaves in retreat, or jumped inside the bush to hide. Focusing, his eyes narrowed, Spike crept around to the other side of the bush. Still, there was no pony to be seen. Spike scratched his chin in thought. There was only one pony in Equestria who could be that fast. Rainbow Dash? Spike yelled. Only complete silence answered him. As the little dragon stood there, perplexed, something rammed into his back hard enough to knock him face first into the grass. "Tag, you're it!" Spike heard a female voice yell. "Okay, Rainbow, you asked for it," Spike shouted as he picked himself up to his knees. Now there were at least 2 peppers bound for her food. However, as Spike rolled over into his rear, the creature standing above him was not Rainbow Dash. His spines drooped in shock and embarrassment at the realization of his mistake. What he saw was a creature that made his every sense, save for sight, go numb, and he was sure that sense was fooling him. Standing before him was a cute dragon girl, about his age and size from the looks of it. Icy blue scales sparkled in the sunlight as she looked down on him with beautiful blue eyes. Pale blue hair dropped down to the base of her neck. "I'm sorry," said the pretty stranger. "I didn't ram you too hard, did I?" Not at all," Spike answered, ignoring the pounding pain in his spine. The she-dragon giggled and smiled down on him. "I'm Sapphire," she said warmly. What's your name?" Spike's jaw hung open, frozen in place. Sapphire. It was the most beautiful name he'd ever heard in his young life. "My name is, uh..." A silent struggle for the answer left Spike clamping his eyes shut in thought. "Oh, come on, Spike. Think. What is your name, Spike? Hello, Equestria to Spike." "Spike?" he answered his thoughts out loud. "Oh yeah, that's right. My name's Spike." Sapphire giggled a sweet little giggle that made Spike's heart skip a beat. "Nice to meet you, Spike." She offered a forepaw to help him stand up. As Spike took her hand into his own, every nerve in his body tingled. He was holding hands with the most beautiful dragoness he'd ever laid his eyes on. Of course, she was the first dragoness he'd ever laid eyes on, but he was still sure this particular dragoness was exceptionally beautiful. Quivering, unsure of what to say or do, Spike stared at the paw that had just grasped Sapphire's, making a silent vow that he'd never wash that paw again. "Hey!" Sapphire's voice pulled Spike from his trance-like state. He looked back up at her to see her tilting her head, smiling. "Weren't you it?" "Huh?" "Catch me if you can." With that, Sapphire ran in the other direction, her blue hair flowing behind her. Spike's heart pounded like it was going to crack his ribs. This friendly and pretty dragon was openingly inviting him to play. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, but the throbbing pain in his back assured him he was very much awake. What was there to lose? Spike chased after Sapphire, and for the first time noticed the big blue ribbon she wore in her tail. It made Spike think that Sapphire was on a level of beauty that rivaled even Rarity's. For the next hour, the two young dragons chased each other around, wrestling, laughing, and giggling as baby dragons do. Their romp made Spike forget all about his duties to Twilight, until it returned them back to the bush with the sack full of dragon pepper still sitting there. "Oh no!" Spike held his paw to his face. "What's the matter, Spike?" "I forgot all about Twilight. I'm sorry, Sapphire. I have to head home. She's probably worried about me." Sapphire tilted her head, giving Spike a quizzical look. "Twilight? Who's that?" She frowned, her eyes giving off a hint of sadness. "Is she your girlfriend?" "Who, Twilight? No way. She's a unicorn from Ponyville. I'm just her assistant. That's why I was picking these peppers." Sapphire flashed a big toothy smile. "So you don't have a girlfriend then?" Spike stammered, feeling his face flush. If she'd just given an open invitation, this was turning out to be the best day ever. "I don't." "So..." Sapphire lowered her head bashfully, twisting her foot into the ground. "Do you want to meet here again tomorrow?" "Would I ever!" The dragoness's eyes seemed to light up as she giggled out loud. "Great! So, see you tomorrow?" "You bet." "Okay. Bye, Spike." "Bye, Sapphire." "Goodbye." "Goodbye to you, too." "See ya." "See ya." "Later." "Yup. Later." Their exchange made the two dragons laugh, Sapphire turning her head shyly away from Spike. "Okay," Spike continued once he'd catched his breath. "I'm really leaving this time. See you tomorrow, Sapphire." He then took off running in the direction of Ponyville. "Bye, Spike," Sapphire yelled to the running, shrinking form. "See you tomorrow." As hard as he fought it, Spike couldn't help smiling his entire run home. Sapphire was friendly, playful, beautiful. To have found another dragon his age in Equestria, and she was interested in him. Spike couldn't believe his luck. Rarity hadn't even come into his thoughts since he'd met Sapphire. "Okay, Spike, time to act normal," the little dragon thought as he reached the outskirts of Ponyville. He couldn't afford to let Twilight find out about his new friend. If she did, she might think he didn't want to be her assistant anymore. A casual stroll took him through the village of ponies, all of them minding their own business and oblivious to the little dragon's inward glee. "I'm home!" Spike shouted as he stepped into the library. Twilight busied herself with dusting off the shelves with a feather duster that hovered in mid-air from the violet unicorn's magic. "Wow, Spike," she answered as she glanced out the window, the back over her shoulder at him. "What took you so long? It's almost sundown." The dragon fidgeted. "Well, you know how rare those dragon peppers are. I wanted to make sure I picked enough." As Spike set the potato sack down on the floor, Twilight rested the duster on the top shelf and trotted over to get a look at the pickings. The sack had been filled almost to the top. "Spike, my goodness, this is more than enough. You've really outdone yourself this time." Twilight gave him a gentle noogie of praise. "My #1 assistant. I'll start my research on them tomorrow. Why don't you take the day off?" "You mean it?" "Absolutely, Spike. You earned it." No duties to Twilight? Nothing planned for the day? He was completely free to meet Sapphire again. In his mind, he did a fist pump as he jumped for joy. On the outside, he managed to remain cool and calm. "Thanks, Twilight. You're the best." Spike couldn't stop himself from embracing the unicorn. Twilight smiled and patted Spike on the back. Chapter 2. The following day was sunny and balmy, with only a pleasant breeze sweeping Equestria's plains. It was the perfect day for being outdoors. Applejack tended to the fields of apple trees, while the 3 Cutie Mark Crusaders bounced about Ponyville, still searching for ways to find their marks. A rainbow blur of color streaked over Spike's head as he neared the edge of town. Rainbow Dash, of course. Off to the side, Pinkie Pie engaged in a playful hop around Ponyville, passing each pony she came across an invitation to another one of her parties. The little dragon ignored all of that, however. His only focus was reaching the field where he met Sapphire the previous afternoon. Unbeknownst to Spike, Rainbow Dash stopped in midair, rubbing her chin with her hoof as she watched the dragon march out of the village. Where could he be going? It was unusual for him to leave Ponyville alone. As much as she hated flying slow, she couldn't fight her curiosity and trailed Spike a few feet away from him, careful not to alert him of her presence. It hardly seemed ethical to spy on the little dragon, but Rainbow defeated the thought by convincing herself that there were many creatures in Equestria's countryside that would prey on an almost defenseless baby dragon. If he was in danger, he could use her help. She was the embodiment of loyalty, after all. Yes, that was it. She was following him to protect him, not to spy on him. The dragon pepper bush where Spike had met Sapphire came into view, forcing him to smile. She'd been on his mind ever since he left yesterday. As he got closer, the smile turned into a frown. The meadow was empty. Where was Sapphire? Rainbow Dash darted behind a tree to stay out of Spike's view as he pivoted to observe his empty, lonely surroundings. What was he doing way out there? And what had made him stop? A familiar giggle snapped Spike to attention. Sapphire's? He turned in a full circle one more time to be sure he hadn't overlooked her. A light breeze swept through the meadow, rattling the leaves in the trees, but no other motion could be seen. "Sapphire?" Spike yelled. Another giggle answered him. "Sapphire!" "Over here, Spike!" The dragoness's sweet voice echoed across the meadow. But where? "Where is over here?" Spike shouted. "I can't tell you," she teased. "That would spoil the fun." Slowly, Rainbow craned her neck around the tree. Who was Sapphire? She'd never heard of any pony around Ponyville with that name. "Come and find me!" Sapphire's voice pierced through the silence. More interested than ever, Rainbow's eyes locked onto Spike as he walked around the meadow, searching for the source of the mysterious voice. She had almost been spotted once. Perhaps she'd be better hidden on the ground. The Pegasus descended until her hooves pressed against the soft grass surrounding her tree. "I don't see you," Spike yelled again as he neared a patch of trees separate from the one where Dash had been hiding. "You're getting warmer." The little purple dragon walked into the center of the trees, shouting one more time. "How about now?" "Okay, stay right there." Something among the trees made Rainbow hold her head high in amazement. Using her claws to climb down the trunk of the tree to Spike's back was a small female dragon with icy blue scales. On all fours, she crawled across the ground like a cat stalking its prey. She paused, twitching her tail in anticipation as she checked her alignment, and pounced on Spike from the rear. She and Spike disappeared underneath the tall grass. The sounds of both dragons giggling came soon after. The powder blue pony clamped her hoof into her mouth in an attempt to cram the growing giggle back down. Little Spike had found himself a girlfriend. How cute was that? "Rainbow Dash?" a soft whisper came from behind her. Startled, Rainbow buckled her knees, but she held her ground and wheeled in a half circle, where a pink-haired Pegasus was standing behind her. "Fluttershy? What are you doing way out here?" Fluttershy turned her head away from Rainbow, winding her hoof in her hair with embarrassment. I was curious where Spike was headed. If I'm intruding, I'll just go back to Ponyville." "Not at all, Fluttershy." Rainbow Dash wrapped a foreleg around Fluttershy's neck to reassure her. "Come take a look at this." Okay." Dash guided Fluttershy to the edge of the tree and pointed her hoof to the pair of romping baby dragons. "Get a load of that!" Fluttershy gasped and drew her head back. "I don't believe it! Another baby Fluttershy's rare exclamation was cut short by Dash putting her hoof over the yellow Pegasus's mouth. "Shh! I don't want Spike to know I was spying on—" She paused for a few seconds. Following him." Racking her brain to come up with a quasi-legitimate reason, she settled on the most reasonable one she could think of. "To make sure he didn't get into any danger." "But I've never seen a baby dragon in Equestria besides Spike. Where did she come from?" "Beats me," replied Dash. Fluttershy smiled widely at the giggling, romping dragons. "That is so cute." The Rainbow Pegasus turned away from the meadow, motioning for Fluttershy to follow. "Come on, let's go tell Twilight. She'd love to hear about this." Rainbow? Maybe Spike should be the one to tell her." Rainbow Dash raised an eyebrow, staring at Fluttershy for a few seconds. The pink-haired pony lowered herself in submission and turned her head to direct eye contact with Dash. "But if you want to tell her, I can't stop you." Rainbow Dash sighed and drooped. "No, you're right. Spike will tell Twilight when he's ready." She glanced over her shoulder to get one last peek at the laughing, playing dragonlings, then turned back to Fluttershy. "Look, we better get out of here before they see us." Saying nothing, Fluttershy followed behind her colorful companion back to Ponyville. "Come back here!" Spike shouted as he attempted to snatch Sapphire's tail with his paw. She only giggled and ran faster, leaving Spike to grab at empty air. "Where are you going?" "Follow me, Spike. Keep up if you can." Spike's chase took him through a thick blanket of trees, back into an open meadow several hundred yards away from the pepper bush. "How much farther?" Spike asked, panting. Judging from the way the trees were starting to thin out, they'd been running for almost a mile. "Almost there." As the trees became more scarce, the surface of a distant pond glittered in the sunlight, with Sapphire running straight for it. "Thirsty?" she yelled. "You bet." Soon, the two young dragons reached the edge of the pond, and both went on all fours to get a drink. Sapphire gasped, causing Spike to look up at her. "What is it?" Sapphire narrowed her eyes, staring hard at the water. "There's something strange down there." "Strange?" "Yeah. Come take a look." Spike stood up and moved closer to Sapphire in order to peer into the pond at whatever it was she'd seen. Before he had a chance to move out of the way, he saw Sapphire's reflection come up behind his own and shove him into the water. Sapphire fell over on her back in a fit of laughter. "Tricked you, Spike!" The little dragoness continued to giggle for a few more seconds, but her laughter faded as she realized Spike had not yet come back up for air. "Oh no!" she shouted out loud to herself. "He didn't tell me if he could swim or not." Sapphire moved closer to the edge of the water, alert for any signs of Spike so she'd know where to dive in and rescue him. As she scanned the water, A purple hand shot above the surface, grabbed her by the arm, and yanked her off her feet into the water. For a few seconds, she felt weightless, unable to breathe, unsure of what had just happened. By the time she got her head above water, Spike was already on the bank, having his turn to laugh. "Hey! Hey!" Sapphire shouted as she wiped the water from her face. Eyes locked onto the bobbing blue head, Spike held both arms into the air in triumph. "Spike's revenge!" "Oh, yeah?" Sapphire asked with a sly grin. She drew her arm back and splashed a handful of water at Spike. "Hey, come on, no fair!" he yelled, as he leapt backwards to avoid getting splashed. Sapphire only laughed harder, swam closer, and splashed with even more force. "All right, you asked for it!" Letting out a long Tarzan scream, Spike made a beeline for the water and jumped 5 times his own body height, a physics-defying feat he'd learned from Pinkie Pie. Whilst in midair, the dragon curled himself up and transitioned into a front flip with a shout of, "Dragon Ball!" Sapphire had been too captivated with Spike's feat to realize what his intentions were, until she saw him descending towards the water near her position. By then, it was too late to swim away. All she could do was shield her face with her arm as the resulting splash consumed her like a tidal wave. Spike's green-finned head popped up from the water in time for Sapphire to give it another splash. "You're gonna get it now," she taunted as Spike shook the water from his face. Spike narrowed his eyes and gave off a playful smirk. "We'll see about that." A giggle was Sapphire's answer as she drew back from Spike, daring him to give chase. As soon as he started after her, Sapphire turned away from him, using her tail as an oar to not only propel herself through the pond, but kick up powerful splashes of water as she did so. Despite this, Spike oriented on her, chasing her in 2 full laps through the pond before she climbed up on the soft sand of the bank. Sapphire brushed her hair from her eye, then turned her neck to see Spike climbing out of the water as well. With a sly smile, she placed her palm on Spike's chest and shoved him back into the water. Spike's purple head emerged from the surface a few seconds later, watching Sapphire laugh at his misfortune. "Okay, this is getting old." "I'm sorry, I couldn't help it," Sapphire said in a tone that let Spike know her apology was sincere. "Here, let me help you up out of there." For a few seconds, Spike stared at the blue paw outstretched towards him. Probably another trick. Even if so, he couldn't pass up the opportunity to hold hands with Sapphire a second time, even if only for a second. He grasped Sapphire's paw and felt himself being pulled up to the bank by her strength. It felt good to be on solid ground again, but it felt even better when he realized Sapphire hadn't let go of his paw after pulling him out of the water. He looked at her clenched hands for a few moments, then back up at Sapphire. She smiled at him, averted her eyes from his gaze, and turned away, pondering the possibilities of the moment. "Come on, Spike," she finally answered as she looked back up at Spike. "I'll walk you back to the meadow." Her hand guided him back towards the path of trees from whence they came. Was it okay for him to keep her hold on her paw? She didn't seem to object. Still, in an act of politeness, Spike released his grip, only to find his paw once again warmed by Sapphire's own soft, warm palm. "I didn't say you have to let go," Sapphire said. There was a hint of coy embarrassment in her voice. Spike felt his face flush. Was this really happening? Did she like him? Like him? As he opened his mouth to ask, his own embarrassment held the words in. At the very least, he could enjoy the moment in silence. In those moments, as they strolled through the wooded path paw in paw, a startling feeling Spike had never experienced before began to swell within him. It was a pleasant, warm, fuzzy feeling that not even Rarity ever gave him. Certainly it couldn't be. Spike shook the thought from his head. He'd only known Sapphire for a couple of days, and things like the L word don't happen that fast, do they? Maybe Twilight would know. But how could he ask without giving any hints about his new friend? Spike? Are you okay? Sapphire's voice snapped Spike out of his concentration. Who, me? Sure. Why? Do I look sick? Well, you seem kind of nervous and distracted. Maybe a little, Spike answered, his voice shaky. Sapphire did make him nervous, but a good kind of nervous. Sapphire pulled herself closer to Spike, so close their sides were nearly touching. Why are you nervous? Well... Spike tried to think of an excuse, but he couldn't lie to Sapphire. He couldn't. Being with you kinda makes me nervous. Aww, Sapphire said. For a few seconds, she rested her head on Spike's shoulder, then quickly pulled it away. To be honest, being with you kinda makes me nervous too. Does that mean we like each other? Spike hadn't even thought about the words before he said them. Sapphire giggled. I don't know. Maybe it does. Meanwhile, back in Ponyville, Twilight Sparkle let out an annoyed growl. Of all the days to give Spike a free day, she had to pick today. Her entire afternoon consisted of searching for books on plants by herself, only a few of which had any useful information about dragon peppers. There was a stack of books piled on the floor next to the bookcase, dragon pepper flesh and seeds all over the table, and no one to help her pick them all up. For a second, she considered leaving the cleanup for Spike tomorrow, but the whole point of giving him a day off was to let him rest for the hard work he'd been doing. It wouldn't be fair to leave today's work for him to do tomorrow. She shook her head. Maybe she could use a little fresh air, and a milkshake from Sugar Cube Corner. Twilight stepped outside into the late afternoon air. It was mild and pleasant. Maybe a walk would do her some good. As she started for Sugar Cube Corner, a streak of colors in the air stopped her in mid-step. Rainbow Dash, am I glad I ran into you! Rainbow Dash stopped in mid-air, staring wide-eyed at the purple unicorn. Did Twilight know about Spike? Sure. Did you need some help, Twilight? Actually, I could use a hand with the cleanup. I hate to bother you with this, but I sorta gave Spike the day off, and there's no pony else around to help. Rainbow Dash closed her eyes, and put her hoof on her chest in pride. Don't you worry about a thing, pal. I'll help you get this place cleaned up in 10 seconds flat, or my element isn't loyalty. Great. I knew I could count on a good friend like you. Twilight's head followed Dash as she became a blur of colors that zipped through the library door. A chest beat! A loud crash came from inside the house, followed by the sound of something ceramic shattering. Twilight winced at this. Cringing, she raised her forehoof. Careful! Twilight wasn't sure she wanted to find out what had been broken, but she galloped back inside the library nonetheless. In a far corner of the room, Rainbow Dash had fallen flat on her back. Beside her was the remains of what was once a whole statue of a stallion that had worn a large frilly collar around his neck. As Twilight observed the pile, she let out a startled gasp. The head of the statue was still in one piece, laying on the floor with his pony-tailed head looking up at her. Hey, Twilight, I think I ran into your statue of the stallion with the egg-shaped head. Oh no! My one-of-a-kind bust of Wilhelm Shakespeare! One-of-a-kind? Rainbow gnashed her teeth in regret at the words. Sorry, Twilight. Well, Twilight said as she observed what remained of Sir Shakespeare. She then shot a glare at the fallen Pegasus. It's not okay. That was a gift from Princess Celestia. It was worth more money than every book in this room put together. During Twilight's lecture, Rainbow picked herself up back to her hooves and dusted herself off. Yikes! No kidding? Who was he, anyway? Twilight groaned and did a face-hoof. What pony never heard of Sir Wilhelm Shakespeare? He was only one of the most famous poets in Equestria's recorded history. Dash cocked her head at the mess she'd made. What was so special about some egg-headed horse who looked like he was alive 700 years ago? The weight of Twilight's eyes fell upon Rainbow, who wilted under the unicorn's glare, hit with a pang of regret. She lowered herself, giving Twilight an apologetic look. "Oh boy, I really screwed up this time, didn't I? I know it wasn't on purpose, but yes!" A nervous chuckle sounded from Rainbow's muzzle as she looked at her right shank. "Oh, silly me! Look at the time! Gotta fly!" As Dash made a break for the door, Twilight vanished in a shower of magic sparks and materialized in front of the door to halt her retreat. "Not so fast, Rainbow. You're gonna owe me for this one." Rainbow Dash groaned. "Worth more than every book here put together. I figure I'll be able to come up with that money sometime between now and at the end of next century. Are you sure you don't want me to do some chores or something?" Twilight narrowed her eyes. "I think you've done enough." Chapter 3. Warm beams of morning sunlight coming from her window hit Twilight Sparkle in the face, prying her eyes open for the morning. After a sleepy moan, she lifted her head from her pillow and yawned. For a few minutes, she sat upright in her sheets to allow the morning grogginess to subside before climbing out of bed. One by one, she stretched her legs, yawned a second time, then trotted over to her bedroom mirror where a messy-haired reflection stared her down. Twilight's horn glittered with magic energy, and the brush sitting on the dresser lifted itself into the air to groom the unicorn's tangled and matted mane back to its straight-banged neatness. Now that the matter of her hygiene had been taken care of, Twilight pranced down the wooden stairs for some breakfast. A bowl of magical trinkets would really hit the spot. Spike wasn't in the lobby of the library when Twilight reached the bottom of the stairs. He must still be asleep. Twilight shrugged. If he wasn't up by the time she finished breakfast, she'd have to wake him up. There was a lot of work to do today. After walking into the kitchen, Twilight used her magic to open a high cupboard and remove a box of cereal and a glass bowl, both of which suspended in mid-air until Twilight rested them on the table. She tilted her head. There was some sort of note scribbled out on a piece of parchment sitting next to the bowl. A sparkling aura surrounded it, causing it to hover in front of Twilight so she could read it out loud to herself. "Dear Twilight, sorry I didn't tell you in person, but Celestia wanted me to take care of some royal business in Canterlot today. I'll be home at sunset. Hope you're not too mad. Spike." Twilight rubbed her chin with her hoof. Why hadn't Celestia told her about this royal business? The unicorn shook off her irritation. It was probably none of her business, strictly confidential between alicorns and dragons. Either way, Twilight groaned. The library was still a mess. With Spike gone, she'd have to clean up by herself and continue her research without any assistance. But that could wait until after breakfast. Twilight ate her cereal in silence, using her magic to manipulate the spoon instead of her hooves like most ponies. Meanwhile, Spike's heart pounded as he made his way back to the meadow where the dragon pepper bush stood. He could hardly wait to see Sapphire since the two departed and arranged to meet up again the next morning. It felt bad to lie to Twilight about where he was really going, but he simply wasn't ready to tell her about Sapphire, and was prepared for whatever workload awaited him when he got back. For a moment, he could only think of the dragoness. What games would they play today? How much closer would they grow? How should he know when it's appropriate to kiss a girl? So many thoughts raced through his head as he continued to trek for the meadow. The dragon pepper bush came into view in the distance, along with a small blue form waving at Spike. Despite his anxiety, the little dragon couldn't help but smile and sprinted towards it. However, the closer he got, the more his smile melted into a frown. This wasn't just any blue form. As he neared the bush, he realized the form also had a mane and tail in a rainbow of colors. This was not Sapphire, but a Pegasus with a blue coat. "Rainbow Dash?" Spike asked once he was within earshot of her. "What are you doing way out here?" "Oh, just taking a morning flight, that's all." Rainbow Dash yawned and stretched her forelegs, then fluttered down off the tree branch until she touched the ground. "How about you, Spike? Does Twilight know you're out here all by yourself?" Well, she knows I'm not home. If it's any of your business. Being a loyal friend is my business. Well, next to winning races, that is, Rainbow said as she flew in a circle around Spike. And I don't think I could call myself a loyal friend if I were keeping secrets from any pony. Spike narrowed his eyes and folded his arms across his chest. What are you getting at, Dash? Spike, I know about your new friend. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy for you. But if you're going to be running off like this every day, I think Twilight should know the real reason why. And if you won't tell her about your little girlfriend, then I will. You were spying on me yesterday, Spike shouted, pointing an accusing claw at the Pegasus. And you didn't even have a clue. So awesome! I'm like a ninja pony. Don't tell her. I'm not ready for her to find out yet. Do it, Dash replied in a stern voice. Soon, or I will. Okay, I'll tell her. Sheesh. Glad you could see reason. Rainbow turned her head to look behind her. The little blue dragoness was approaching from the horizon. All right, looks like your little friend is on her way here. Have fun, and remember what I told you. Twilight's going to find out one way or the other. Do the right thing, Spike. Without another word, Rainbow zipped off into the opposite direction from the approaching dragonling, leaving behind the blur of colors that hung in the air for only a couple of seconds before wisping into nothingness. Spike growled to himself. Rainbow had been spying on him. A couple dragon peppers would not do now. He'd at least need 3 of them to exact sweet revenge on the Pegasus. Sweet fury revenge. Even enough to kill her taste buds for at least a month. Spike! Sapphire's sweet little voice yelled as she ran up to the purple dragon. With no warning, she embraced him in a hug. I missed you. Spike trembled in Sapphire's grasp. He hadn't expected that. Unsure of what to do, he wrapped his arms around her to return the hug. I, missed you too, Saph. Smiling, Sapphire tilted her head. Saph, huh? I kind of like that. And I know what we can do today. Follow me. Eyes narrowed in annoyance. Twilight manipulated a washcloth with her magic, wiping it against the table to clean up the mess of dragon pepper seeds and crushed red flesh. She'd have to find some way to clean up 2 days' worth of mess, and still have enough time to get some research done. Why would Spike and Princess Celestia conduct royal business without telling her? The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. She scrubbed harder to fight her irritation, causing a seed to fly off the table and square into the unicorn's eye. All at once, Twilight dropped the cloth and held her hoof to her mouth in dread of what was sure to follow. She gritted her teeth and braced herself. It wasn't enough, as a scream of pain echoed across the library. Ah! Ah! My eye's on fire! Some pony help me! Half blind, Twilight ran frantic circles around the kitchen looking for something, anything to get the burning pain out of her eye. Pinkie Pie, who had been out for a stroll, overheard the screaming and charged headfirst into the library. Holy macaroni and cheese with peas! The Earth Pony exclaimed. There were books lying all over the floor, flasks and tubes strewn about, and the remains of what was once a whole statue of Sir Wilhelm Shakespeare. Burglars! Pinkie shouted. Some sort of noise came from the library. Well, who else was going to fight them off? You picked the wrong library, burglars! Pinkie took a breath of courage and charged into the kitchen, where she found the purple unicorn pouring a jug of milk over her face. Pinkie couldn't help but giggle at the sight. Hey, Twilight, if you wanted to have a milk drinking contest, why didn't you invite me? Pinkie? Twilight asked, her left eye shut in pain. What are you doing here? Well, first you were all like, some pony help. Then I was all like, I'll save you, Twilight. Then I came inside, and there were books and sciencey stuff all over the floor, so I thought there might be a burglar, so I came in to scare them off. But it looks like you've gotten it taken care of. Pinkie, there were no burglars. I just got a pepper seed in my eye. Well, what about the messy mess in your lobby? Spike's been gone for the last couple of days, and I haven't had the time to do any cleaning. Flattered, Twilight raised a forehoof. Wait a minute. You were going to fight off burglars for me, if there were any? Sure, Pinky said with a big smile. She wrapped a foreleg around Twilight's neck and pressed her cheeks together. I'd do anything for a friend. Twilight smiled back and raised an eyebrow. Anything? You betcha. Twilight pushed Pinky away so she could look her in the eye. Then how about getting this place cleaned up while I go out for some supplies? And for Pony's sake, don't touch anything breakable. Okie dokie Loki. The pond? Spike asked after Sapphire had led him back to the pond they were at yesterday. Why are we here again? Want to see a cool trick? Sapphire answered, completely ignoring Spike's question. Sure. The blue dragoness held her little arms to the air. Her eyes closed tight in what seemed to be great effort. What was she doing? Before Spike could inquire, a frigid air surrounded the pond, sending up steam from the water as the entire waterhole solidified in only a few seconds. Spike kneeled down and tapped on the surface. It was real ice, and not an illusion. How did you do that? You couldn't tell? Sapphire asked. I'm an ice dragon. Of course Twilight had told Spike stories about certain species of dragons that could manipulate nature's elements. Red dragons could control fire. Yellow dragons had power over lightning. Green could have power over plants or wind, depending on the species. Blue dragons were usually either water or ice dragons. But since he hadn't seen any dragons other than the one he encountered in the Everfree Forest, he'd never been sure if there was any truth to these stories. Until now. Sapphire, that's amazing! Stepping onto the frozen pond, Sapphire giggled. Come on, Spike! For a few moments, Spike watched as the dragoness skated gracefully around the pond, hands cupped behind her back. She spun around several times, causing her hair to flow about in a manner that made Spike's heart flutter. Sapphire really was beautiful. Spike walked onto the ice, fighting to keep his balance as his feet slid across the surface of the pond. He'd fought too hard and fell face first onto the ice, sending him spinning and sliding across the pond like a hockey puck. Sapphire laughed at this, and she skittered over to Spike. Ooh, that was smooth. Ignoring the comment, Spike picked himself up back to his feet, only to fall on his rear, and Sapphire to giggle at his misfortune once again. Here, she said, offering both paws to him. Let me help you up. The two dragons spun in slow circles, eyes locked onto each other. Spike had never felt his heart pound so hard. He longed to kiss her just once. But was this the right time? Distracted as he was, Spike's little feet slid out from under him before he could stop himself from falling. His weight pulled Sapphire down on top of him, as he landed back first onto the ice with a grunt. A few seconds passed before he realized Sapphire had him pinned down against the surface of the pond, her face only inches away from his. The little dragon trembled. Was she going to kiss him? Though Spike had heard Sapphire do a fair share of giggling the past couple of days, none made his nerves tingle more than the soft, nervous chuckle she gave off as her beautiful face looked down on him, lost in his eyes. Sapphire brought her face closer to Spike's, and touched his cheek with her muzzle, an action that set the purple dragon's heart on fire. In the passing few seconds, he realized he might very well have found the best thing that had ever happened to him. A full backpack draped around her back, Twilight pushed open the door to the library a couple hours later after leaving to gather some supplies for her research. Immediately, she was nailed in the face by blaring music and falling streamers. At least 24 ponies had gathered in the library, drinking punch, dancing to the music, conversing, and giggling amongst themselves. Twilight groaned in annoyance and gnashed her teeth, but still found herself unable to suppress her anger enough to keep from shouting out, Pinkie Pie! A pink pony with curly hair sprung up to the front door, eyes closed and smiling. Hiya, Twilight! Welcome back! Pinky, I thought you said you were going to get this place cleaned up. I did, but you were taking so long and I was so bored, so I decided to throw a party. You mean make a bigger mess than the one that was here before I left? Oh, don't you worry about that. Pinky waved a hoof to dismiss Twilight's outburst. We'll get this place cleaned up before you can say jelly beans. Okay, every pony. Any pony who wants to keep partying has to help clean up afterwards. All at once, the room silenced. Every pony stared at Pinky in horror. A stampede shook the floor and rattled the books against the wall, leaving only Twilight and Pinky in the library seconds later. Twilight narrowed her brow. You were saying? There was confetti all over the floor. A streamer had fallen from the ceiling, draped over an oak chair. Frosting and sprinkles all over the counter. Candy wrappers, straws, paper decorations, and other trash had been strewn all about the library, and the sight made Pinky smile an embarrassed smile. Jelly beans? The sky had begun to darken when Sapphire and Spike returned to the dragon pepper bush, paw in paw. A beautiful orange sunset cast itself over the horizon, seemingly setting it on fire. Spike? Sapphire asked. Spike turned his head to see Sapphire brushing her foot across the grass, eyes looking to the ground instead of at him. Yes, Sapphire? She choked on the words with a giggle, took a deep breath to gather her courage, and continued. I don't know how to ask this, so I'm just gonna come right out and ask. Would you like to be my boyfriend? Knees shuddering at the question, Spike took a few seconds to think. Boyfriend? As in boyfriend? A special romantic friend to be closer to a girl's heart than any other friend? Do you mean like a boyfriend you're dating? Like I'm your boyfriend and you're my girlfriend? Of course that's what I mean, silly. Like he was going to turn that down. Would I ever? The blue dragon continued to fidget. So, we're boyfriend and girlfriend then? I guess so, Spike replied as he scratched the back of his head. For a few moments, the young dragons stared into each other's eyes, slowly moving their heads closer together. They shut their eyes as both braced for the moment, hearts fluttering. Sapphire dared a slight peek. She was only a few inches away from kissing Spike. But was she ready? No, she wasn't. Not yet. In that moment, she lost her nerve and took a step forward to snare Spike in a hug instead. Thanks, Sapphire said. She rested her chin on Spike's shoulder as he wrapped his little arms around her. Boyfriend. This ends Part 1.